What's a little known but obvious fact that will immediately make all of us feel stupid? Story 1. Clocks turn clockwise because that is the way the shadow on a sundial turned in the northern hemisphere. Story 2. Well-cared-for goldfish can reach up to 25 years old, over 40 in the wild. Hermit crabs also live about 40 to 50 years in the wild, but usually only about 6 months in captivity. Also, breeding them is very hard, so they are all wild caught and go through hell just to make it to sale. Basically, the hermit crab you purchased as a kid wasn't living for a few months. It was just dying very, very slowly. The hermit crab trade is really quite sad. Answer. Radiolab has a great episode called Crabs All the Way Down about the woman who cracked the code on healthy hermit crab breeding and development in captivity. She's just a regular person who wanted to help and was endlessly motivated to figure it out. It was a really sweet story, not to negate your comment, which is unfortunately a reality for most hermit crabs, just sharing a little positive development that will hopefully spark larger change. Link to episode. Story 3. Ravens can be taught to talk and talk clearly. Yes, I know about the raven poem, but figured it was all metaphorical and that I'm like, it's genuinely possible that someone had a raven that could say nevermore. Answer. And they're smart. Supposedly similar to apes and whales. They can use tools to get food and even plan for the future. I even once talked to one that was trying to open a gate. I told him, "Give me a sec to help." And he tilted his head, like my dog does when trying to understand something, and stepped back from the lever. I opened the gate. He looked at me and did a little bow, then hopped through. 3. Story 4. In the Greek alphabet, there's 2 letters for the letter O, a small-sounding O as in job, a large-sounding O as in tone, so they called one O small and one O large, but in Greek so they come out as Omicron and Omega. Story 5. When I was a kid, I thought Tutti Frutti was just a funny name of a flavor, and it wasn't until I took a trip to Italy that I found out it literally means all fruits. That should have been obvious to me, and I felt stupid. Answer. Tutti Frutti is also the title of a quite cringy German game show from the late 80s, where the contestants had to compete in silly games, and the loser of a round had to strip a piece of his wardrobe. The points were given at random so that, in any case, the female contestant was naked at the end. Between the rounds, there were also topless dancers. Those were strange times. Story 6. The purpose of a nuclear power plant is to boil water to make the steam that actually moves the turbines. Answer. A radioisotope thermoelectric generator, on the other hand, does not use steam. It does, however, still use heat. They're fascinating in a slightly cosmic horror sort of way. Since they have no moving parts, they can run for decades with no maintenance, so are used for space probes. The Soviet Union also used them for unmanned lighthouses in the Arctic. In 2001, 3 people, the country of Georgia, found 2 dismantled RTGs in the woods. It did not end well. Look up the Leah radiological accident if you're curious. Story 7. Everyone who laughs at the fact that when silent film got sound, they were nicknamed talkies has not spent enough time thinking about the word movies. Story 8. Helicopter is not based on a combo of the words heli and copter. It comes from the combination of the Greek words heliko, meaning spiral, and patir, meaning wing. Story 9. Tax brackets. If you go up a bracket, you are only taxed on what you made in that bracket. Say you made $60,001 and the next bracket starts at $60,000. You only get taxed the higher percentage on the one. Too many people don't understand this. Answer. And payroll taxes, where they get a large bonus or OT payment and think they lost more money to taxes. They don't realize that it's because they got taxed as though that was their regular salary, and in a higher tax bracket just for that one lump sum. and that they will get the extra tax withheld back at income tax filing time, assuming they continue to be paid their usual salary. I have tried to explain this to people, but they aren't convinced at all. Story 10. I was in my 40s when I realized that for any square number, you can take the numbers 1 away from the square root, and their product is 1 less than the square. So 6a8, 48. 1 less than 7 squared, 49. And it works for all squares. 10x12, 120, is 1 less than 11 squared, 121. 1x3 is 1 less than 2 squared, and so on. It works every time. Then I thought back to the number of times I said that N1, N1, N2, 1 in high school, and I was like, I am an idiot. Story 11. Dark roast coffee has the least amount of caffeine. The roasting process cooks a certain amount of caffeine out of raw coffee. Thus, light roast coffee has more caffeine. Story 12. The average age in the ancient past doesn't mean people died often before becoming 40 or so. They often became older than 60. But the child mortality was unbelievably high. Story 13. Fragrance-free and unscented are two different things. Fragrance-free means there has been no added fragrance. Unscented means there isn't much of a detectable scent, and usually it contains a masking fragrance. Story 14. There is a difference between a graveyard and a cemetery. A cemetery is often bigger, while a graveyard is usually smaller and on church grounds. Answer: jail. Short-term confinement facility, for example, to hold people while waiting for trial. Prison. Long-term confinement facility to hold prisoners for their sentence. Magma, molten rock beneath the surface. Lava, magma that has erupted to the surface. Astronomers really wanted to fudge with us when they came up with this system. Asteroid, large space rocks that orbit the sun. Meteoroid, smaller space rocks fractured from asteroids or comets. Meteor, when a meteoroid comes into contact with the Earth's atmosphere and burns up meteorite, when a meteor survives the journey in the atmosphere and lands on the Earth's surface. Comet. Looks like a meteor, but is made from ice and water and burns from nearing the sun instead of the Earth. Story 15. The alphabet song is to the tune of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Took me too many years to realize that one. Story 16. The Earth has to rotate slightly more than 360 to have the same longitude facing the Sun, because the Earth will have revolved one around the Sun in that time. One day is 24 hours, but one sidereal day, the time it takes the Earth to rotate exactly 360, is only 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4 seconds long. Story 17. Tea lights weren't originally meant for decor purposes, like Christmas decor. They were meant to sit inside tea warmers to keep the tea warm for hours. You know, 'cause it's a fudge tea light. Story 18. If Earth were the size of a marble, the nearest star would still be about 4,000 miles away. We're incredibly, mind-bogglingly alone out here. Answer: I have a degree in astrophysics. The craziest thing I've learned from all those years of study is just that fact. The incomprehensible distances between things in space, absolutely massive. Even relatively cramped areas, the archetypal example being an asteroid belt field, are essentially empty, with many miles in between any objects worth noting. There are differing levels of particle density throughout space, but most people don't really care about the 2 atoms per cubic meter floating along. Story 19. Australia is wider than the Moon. Australia east to west. Approx. 4,000 kilometers wide. Moon is approx. 3,475 kilometers wide. Story 20. The Moon appears upside down in the southern hemisphere, relative to how it appears in the northern hemisphere. Story 21. That if people called sunburns by their real name, they'd wear sunblock because a sunburn is actually a radiation burn. Story 22. Mushrooms are not plants. They eat like animals and are closer related to animals than plants. That's why they grow on your food. Answer: they take in oxygen and expel CO2 like us. They do not use photosynthesis, and they really only use light as an indicator of which direction to grow. The mushroom part is a very brief period of their life cycle. There's usually a lot more to them below the ground. Most fungi don't produce mushrooms. Mycology is so cool. I strongly encourage people to learn a little about it. Story 23. Stainless doesn't mean it won't stain. It means it will stain less. This also applies to any product that makes a seemingly too good claim rust-proof, fire-resistant, etc. Answer: I worked at this company once where we had these stainless steel basins that mixed dyes and stuff. They had to be manually cleaned by hand and polished when changing colors. Wound up getting a new boss, and they took away our polishing agents to save money, and I was promptly fired after spending an entire 8-hour shift trying to clean that meanie out, and it still wasn't good enough to run a lighter color, the boss said. And I fudge, quote, "It's stainless steel, so you can just take a rag and wipe it and it will be clean." I didn't even bother explaining the difference between stainless steel and Teflon. I just told them to fudge off and fire me. Story 24. Wage theft, employers stealing from their employees, is the largest form of theft in America, almost doubling the rates of all other forms of theft combined. Story 25. We've landed on the moon 6 times. I've changed a couple moon landing hoaxers' opinions just by stating this fact. Answer: yeah, I've done the same. So many people think we went just the one time and never went back. No, we went multiple times, proved we could repeatedly, and stopped because it was insanely expensive, and we aren't in a Cold War anymore needing to compete with the Soviet Union. I can honestly understand their skepticism if we had only went once in 1969 and then never tried ever again. That would be super suspicious. Definitely changes their perspective when they find out about the 5 other successful missions, although it confuses me what they think the movie Apollo 13 was all about. I guess they think it's not based on a true story? That, and most people don't know we left reflective panels on the moon so that we can shoot lasers at to measure the distance, which really confuses a lot of moon landing deniers. Story 26. I learned yesterday that metric prefixes are Greek when larger than 1 and Latin when smaller than 1, but otherwise mean the same thing. Greek, Latin deca, deci, 10, hecto, centi, 100 kilo, milli, 1000 mega, micro, 1000,000 giga, nano, 1000,000. Story 27. The sides of the box on aluminum foil, parchment paper, wax paper, and cling plastic wrap are meant to be pushed in so that it holds the roller in place. That's why they have the little half-circle cutout on each side, unless it's a super cheap brand. Story 28. A good majority of people who are completely 100 blind don't see black at all, like the popular stereotype may suggest. Instead, they see absolutely nothing at all. No color, no nothing. Most people who hear that blind people only see black think it makes logical sense. An absence of light is darkness after all. However, these people are wrong. Their mind cannot comprehend a complete absence of color, so instead, blackness or darkness is the logical choice. Also, as usual, Hollywood hasn't helped the stereotype die off at all, it has made it flourish. Story 29. Our skin cannot detect wetness. Our skin can detect temperature, pressure, and texture, which can only create the illusion of wetness, which explains why sometimes you may feel wetness when there is none. Story 30. The original patent for the toilet paper roll shows that the toilet paper is supposed to go over the top, not hang down off the back of the roll. Story 31. Kelp forests and seagrass help provide almost 50% of all breathable air. This is why polluting the ocean will be far more detrimental to our lives than air pollution. Edit. I didn't say phytoplankton because it provides a huge of oxygen, but does not provide breathable air technically. Carbon absorption is how we get breathable air with the right, and kelp and seagrass forests are responsible for that at an equal, if not slight, more than all the rainforests we have on land. Apologies for misspeaking. Story 32. Easy Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion, double the Celsius value and add 30. It's not exact, but close. Story 33. You don't need to have a rooster for hens to lay eggs. You need a rooster to get fertilized eggs that will incubate and become chicks. But several people smarter than I have said to me, "Wait, you don't have a rooster? How do you get eggs?" It's just not something people give all that much thought to, I guess. Answer. I used to refuse to eat eggs because of a book I read where a character gets served an egg with a fetal chicken in it. I was into my 20s before someone explained to me that the eggs I buy at the grocery store are highly unlikely to be fertilized. I literally never considered that. I had apparently been walking around assuming any random egg could hatch under the right conditions, and the person was like, "What would you need roosters for then?" Story 34. The byproduct of biochemical reactions in humans at the cellular level is heat. Those millions of reactions happening simultaneously are what gives us an average body temperature of 98.6 Fe. Story 35. Also, apparently bananas are berries and strawberries aren't. My brain refuses to accept this, but here we are. Story 36. Dallas, Texas gets more annual rainfall than Seattle, Washington. Admittedly, not an obvious fact unless you live in Dallas and experience the biblical amounts of rainfall that occur. Story 37. Metric measure, 1 kilogram, 1 liter of water. Water, free of impurities and on sea level, freezes at 0 Celsius and boils at 100. 1 liter of water is 0.01 cubic meters, 1 kilogram. 1,000 L of water is 1 metric ton, 1,000 kgs, and also 1 cubic meter. So if you imagine that water in a perfect cube, that cube will have exact sides of 1 meter, x1 nen, x1 manners. This is how metric system is calculated, easily. It all comes down to nature, water in this situation. We calculated Celsius, a meter and a kilogram by only using water. Story 38. The term venomous is applied to organisms that bite or sting to inject their toxins, whereas the term poisonous applies to organisms that unload toxins when you eat them. Story 39. Mourning geckos are parthenogenetic. They are all female. Males can occur, but they are rare and sterile. So they are basically clones of themselves. It is such a crazy thing to think about. Story 40. First world, the US and its allies. Second world, the USSR and its allies. Third world, everyone else. This was a Cold War thing. Now we use these terms differently. Story 41. When there is a crescent moon and you can sort of see the outline of the rest of the moon, it's because the moon is reflecting light from the earth. Story 42. The most easterly point of Brazil is closer to Africa than it is to the most westerly point of Brazil. Story 43. Most people's lifespan is roughly 4,000 weeks. At 55, I have lived 2,860 weeks. I have a little countdown graphic on my phone as a memento mori. Story 44. Fiance, with one E, is used for a man engaged to be married, while fiancé, with 2 E's, is used for a woman engaged to be married. Blonde is generally used for males, while blonde is used for females. Story 45. There's a measurement line in the cups on liquid laundry detergent. Most people use 4IX, the recommended amount. Answer. My husband has always used so much soap for our stuff, which is almost never really all that dirty. Our 38-year-old Floorcracker 9000 washing machine finally died last week. Since we got the new washer, I've been telling him that it's more efficient, true anyway, and doesn't need as much soap. He's now happily using a more appropriate amount. Hand washing that failure load in our bathtub took so many rounds of rinsing. Story 46. This isn't little known exactly, but I am amazed at the number of times I've had to explain to someone how thermostats work. Turning it up to a temperature higher than what you want it to be doesn't make it heat up faster, or vice versa. My former roommate, instead of turning the thermostat down or off when she was too warm, would instead open the back door right next to the thermostat. I'd suddenly be sweating in my bedroom and walk out into the hall and see the door wide open and hear my roommate in the living room complaining that it's still too hot. Story 47. In the USA, 54% of people read at a 6th grade level or lower. 21% are considered functionally illiterate. Story 48. Globally, the average number of human legs per person is less than 2. This is because some people have only 1 or no legs, and only in extremely rare cases does anybody have more than 2. Story 49. Most of the public toilet seats in America are made with bacteria-resistant materials. The paper toilet seat covers that sit in open cardboard boxes above said, "Toilet seats are not." Story 50. People are terrified by sharks. On average, over the last 100 years, about 1 person per year is eliminated in USA by a shark. Between 2008 and 2021, 379 people died while taking selfies. You are 30x more likely to die taking a picture of yourself than by a shark. Story 51. Plant an acorn in the ground and a huge tree grows. Where does all the wood in that tree come from? If you ask lots of people, many will assume the wood somehow comes from the ground, via the roots. Actually, it comes from thin air. The tree breathes in carbon dioxide, and the carbon is used to produce the wood. Sad to say, I was a grown adult before someone posed this problem to me, and I had no clue. Story 52. In most cars since the late 1980s, there's an indicator arrow on the little gas pump icon in the fuel level indicator that tells you which side of the car your gas tank is for refueling. Super helpful if you have to drive a lot of rental cars. Story 53. You can't actually touch anything. At a molecular level, electrons repel each other, keeping you always out of contact. Answer. The positions of those electrons are not clearly defined at all. What does it mean to touch if not slightly overlapping electron clouds? Or in field theory terms, for 2 electrons to repel each other, a photon is exchanged to carry the force. I would call that exchange touching. In any case, if you want to, you can say that even more stuff is touching than you conventionally feel like. It's just semantics anyways. What is the boundary of the sun? Why not say that it ends wherever sunlight reaches? Then, sun-kissed becomes literal. Much more fun than saying the boundary is where. Gravitational pressure equals radiation pressure. Story 54. Bi-weekly can mean twice a week or every other week. So when someone says bi-weekly and you have to confirm what they mean, and they act like they're smarter than you because they're convinced there's only one definition, they're idiots. Story 55. There. A place there possessive. Belonging to them, they're a contraction of the words they are. Story 56. The imminent climate catastrophe that is apparently only a few years away has already begun, about 10 years ago. It takes time for the effects to manifest themselves, and we're starting to see real damage now. It'll take time to slow it, we're not, and to stop it, we're not going to. Better luck next time. Story 57. There is only one solar system, and it's ours. It's called that because it is the star system for the star Sol, which is our star's name. Answer. Astrophysicist here, eh? The adjective solar is used plenty by normal people and scientists alike. I'd get ridiculous pretty quickly to throw out solar radiation for every star, but ours, and have to say Betelgeuse-Ean radiation, Canis Majorian radiation, WHL 0137 LSAR radiation, and unnamed stars radiation. And before you suggest stellar radiation, Our star has the same stellar dynamic as Sol Solar. Ditto for lunar, which is widely used. Even as a pedant myself, this doesn't really hold up. Story 58. If you don't have kids, you are the end of your bloodline, which extended back 1,000s of generations to create you. This isn't a problem. There are lots of other people having kids, but your branch ends with you. Answer: not really. You are the only unique part of your bloodline. Every other member has had half genes from two different people, and a quarter of those genes got passed on. If you had any siblings, they carry an equal proportion of that bloodline, so if they had any children, it's the same as if you did in terms of continuity. The only thing ending is your particular blend of your parents' genes, and whatever your theoretical partner would have passed. Story 59. The majority of Canadians live south of the 49th parallel, the line that forms most of the border between Canada and the US. Story 60. Humans are not eliminate the planet. They are just eliminate their own species. Life exists in the harshest environments. No matter what we do to the planet, life will continue, just not necessarily human life. Story 61. You're not supposed to shake Polaroid pictures. It can cause the chemicals to mix and ruin the outcome of your photos. Story 62. Baking soda and vinegar neutralize each other when mixed, and it cancels out their cleaning properties. It's one or the other, but not both. Story 63. A little known but obvious fact. You don't actually see with your eyes, you see with your brain. Your eyes are just sensors that collect light and send signals. It's your brain that interprets those signals into what you perceive as sight, including color, depth, and motion. So technically, everything you see is a mental reconstruction, not a direct experience of reality. It's wild how something so fundamental is misunderstood, and once you realize it, it makes you question how much of your world is shaped by perception rather than truth. Story 64. Nipples do not have one single hole in the middle. They have many small holes like a shower head, and people can have different amounts. Average of 418 holes per nipple. Story 65. The last common ancestor of everyone on the planet lived around 1600 BC. For context, the pyramids were already 1,000 years old by then. If you got back to 5000 BC, you have the same ancestor list as everyone else on the planet. Story 66. It is actually possible for something to travel faster than light, just not in a vacuum. Look up the Cherenkov effect. Answer: I have an astrophysics degree. This is kind of misleading in the way you phrase it. 1. It's not so much an object moving faster than light speed, but light traveling slower than light speed. 2. It's not so much light traveling slower than light speed, but light traveling at light speed, but not in a straight, uninterrupted line. It's like having Michael Phelps swimming blindly in molasses while you swim in clear water. Sure, you'll probably beat him. But did you really? Story 67. HR. You are the human who is a resource to be managed and expended. Given that you're the resource, HR is not looking out for you any more than a construction foreman has the best interests of a warped piece of lumber in mind. Story 68. If you could remove all the mycelium from fungi just in the first 10 centimeters of topsoil from around the globe and then make one continuous strand, you would cover the length of the visible universe, which is about 90 billion light years. Story 69. A screw is a simple machine that turns rotational motion into linear motion. It's not just a fastening device. Made me feel the big dumb. Story 70. Metal that is stainless is made from material that doesn't rust. It's actually made from material that oxidizes so fast it creates a small protective barrier that keeps the rest of the metal from oxidizing. Story 71. Literally, no one is judging you for the myriad things that make you self-conscious. Thought experiment. Who did you judge, and on what specific thing? Today, this week, this year, be free. No one cares. Story 72. Pteranodons are not dinosaurs. Plesiosaurs and mosasaurs are not dinosaurs. They're flying and aquatic reptiles, respectively. Story 73. The first man-made object to break the sound barrier was the whip. The loud crack made by the tip is actually a sonic boom. Story 74. The difference between a million and a billion. If you have $1 million, you can live on 100,000 year for 10 years. If you have $1 billion, you can live on 1,000,000 year for 1,000 years. Story 75. Percentages are reversible. 8 of 25 is the same as 25 of 8, and 1 is a lot easier to calculate in your head. Story 76. How many English terms are self-describing? At least as a native English speaker, a good handful don't register as literally as others for whatever reason. The bedroom is, of course, the room where the bed is, but God forbid fireplace actually be fire and place. Waterfall, breakfast, rainbow, necklace, because, etc. It gets even worse when you learn Latin and Greek terms. Dutch and German call rhinoceros nose horn, and we call rhinoceros nose horn, but like on the DL because we are cowards. Story 77. We just learned babies aren't supposed to have water via a stand-up bit that we further researched until about 6 months old. Story 78. Proposed amendments to the U.S. Constitution have no expiration date unless Congress provides one at the time of passing. The 27th Amendment was proposed in 1789 and ratified in 1992. Amendments regarding congressional apportionment, titles of nobility, slavery, and child labor have all been pending for over a century and could be ratified by the states and become law at any time. Story 79. The pyramids are old, as in Cleopatra lived closer to the moon landing or the first iPhone than to the construction of the Great Pyramids. Also, during the construction, there still lived mammoths in Europe. Story 80. Secondhand poisoning can and will eliminate your animals if they try eating a mouse poisoned with rodenticide. Story 81. The months of July and August got their names from Julius and Augustus, the emperors. Originally, July should have been September, sept, meaning 7 in French. Story 82. Right-wing extremists committed every ideologically driven mass, eliminate identified in the U.S. in 2022. And in 2021, they eliminate more people than any other extremist group in the country. Story 83. Old English was a language spoken about 1,500 years ago and ceased around 1066 in various forms. It still went past that, but not for long. It isn't Shakespeare, who is actually early modern English. Story 84. You need to either say your thoughts out loud or write them in a legible manner to participate in the act of communication. Unfortunately, mind readers are too rare to reliably be a help for most people with communication problems. Story 85. Plants don't convert CO2 to oxygen. If it was that easy to break the molecular bonds in CO2, we wouldn't have a climate crisis. The equation for photosynthesis is 6CO2, 6H2O, light energy, C6H12O6, 6O2, C6H2O6 is glucose, which the plant stores, and 6O2 is a byproduct that comes exclusively from the H20, water. Story 86. The term uppercase and lowercase in lettering refers to the shelf of the case that letters were kept in for printing presses. Story 87. Both the Democrats and Republicans are corrupted assholes who only care about making money for themselves and their donors. Story 88. 9 times table, digits on left column count up and digits on right column count down. 1 1 9 0 9 2 9 wait, EX 9 2 7 4 9 3 6 5 X 9 4 5 6 9 5 4 7 X 9 6 3 AX972-9981-109990. Story 89. The earliest treatise on grammar was called Adhyayi and was written in India by Panini. Avatar is a Sanskrit word. Story 90. Goldfish were invented. In medieval Japan, carp were kept for food because they could survive in shallow, poorly oxygenated water, and occasionally some with shiny scales would crop up, be saved, and bred together until they got ones that were all gold. That's right. Japan was literally farming shinies centuries ago. Story 91. If you eat 1 pound of lard and digest it, you will gain more than 1 pound. A pound of lard contains 472 calories. A pound of weight for a person is only 3,500 calories. Story 92. Humanity only became what it is because of people getting distracted and accidentally figuring things out. Agriculture? Some tribes sometimes stayed in one area for a while. Humans tended to chew wheat, 'cause what else will you do if there is nothing else to chew on? Guess what happens if you spit it out at the same area over a year or more time? Bread is invented 'cause beer was heated too long, while beer was invented 'cause they left oatmeal out for too long. And oatmeal was invented 'cause we wanted something else than spit to make the texture of oats better. Writing was invented 'cause people needed to write details for accounting, and accounting was invented to keep track so people wouldn't scam each other, etc. So back to the beginning, we pretty much have progressed, mostly 'cause we got distracted and made mistakes, and sometimes someone figured out how to replicate the mistakes. Story 93. I felt so dumb when someone showed me that your gas gauge shows you which side of the car the tank is on. Story 94. Kobo, the ebook company's name, is an anagram of book. Most people probably knew that, but it only occurred to me a few days ago. I've owned their products for years. Story 95. I hope I'm saying this right, but when a genetic website says someone is 2% something like African or Asian, it doesn't mean you have 2% DNA from that country or region. It means there is a 2% chance your DNA might be from there. Story 96. There are people in the world who do not feel pain. It's a genetic mutation called congenital insensitivity to pain, or congenital analgesia. Story 97. In WW1, what would later become known as shell shock, battle fatigue, and eventually PTSD was simply called cowardice. There are second-hand accounts to this day of commanders across all fronts executing their own men for cowardice. It really wasn't until pretty relatively recently that PTSD started becoming recognized and treated for what it is, like the last 30 years Desert Storm GWAT recent. It's a hell of a thing. Even as late as the 80s, early 90s, it was a kinda taboo topic to even talk about. PPL exhibiting signs of it were more or less brushed aside and put out of sight, out of mind as if an embarrassment. There's a podcast series called Blueprints for Armageddon from Dan Carlin's Intense History podcast channel, awesome, that extensively covers all of WW1 from start to finish. Very long, very good. Highly recommend listening on at least x1.5 speed. Story 98. The moon is 30 Earth diameters away. Really, it's hella far away. Seems like every other movie makes it look, like it's just up the street. I don't think this will make anyone feel stupid, but it made me feel that way some years ago. Also, maybe not an obvious fact. Sorry for missing the assignment problem statement. Story 99. When cleaning the toilet, you're supposed to scrub first, then flush, and wash the brush off whilst it flushes. A lot of people I know flush and then quickly scrub round, which leaves mank in the brush, bristles, and the water. Story 100. Americans buy SUVs not just because of heavy marketing, but because they're in a different vehicle class and therefore are subject to different, more lenient, environmental and fuel consumption laws. Story 101. We interact only with our mind, not reality. This has many implications. Everything is an illusion. Nobody really sees anybody. Our mask sees their mask. We see our own thoughts. There is only now. Guilt comes from thoughts about the past, and anxiety comes from the future, neither of which are real. We don't really know anything directly. Perception is controlled hallucination. Humans have known this for thousands of years, yet here we are. Story 102. Most trees are male, and the reason for the rise in pollen and allergies. It's all the tree come in the air. Story 103. Your eyes are seeing the past. Light takes time to travel. You never see anything in real time. Even your phone screen is delayed by nanoseconds. The moon? 1.3 seconds ago. The sun? 8 minutes ago. Stars? Dead, maybe. Story 104. The reason your mouth tastes like crap every morning is because millions of bacteria have literally been crapping and procreating in your mouth all night. Story 105. There are two other branches in the U.S. government that are both responsible for the state of the country and who is in charge. Everyone wants to cry about the president this and the president that, when there are two entire teams of people who were hired to keep him in check, and vice versa. No one president can do everything alone, good or bad. So rather than focusing all your negative or positive attention on whoever is in the White House, much more emphasis and pressure should be on the other two branches. Answer: Congress has been so dysfunctional for so long that the only way the government keeps running is by them voluntarily handing their responsibilities to the executive branch. Over the years, they've basically given the president the tools to act without them. The War Powers Resolution was supposed to limit unilateral wars, but in practice, Congress funds endless military actions without ever declaring war. The National Emergencies Act lets presidents unlock huge powers with a simple emergency declaration, bypassing Congress entirely. And the day-to-day governing of the country. Everything, from environmental rules to labor protections, is really done by executive agencies because Congress writes vague laws and lets the president's team handle the details. That's why, when people ask why Congress can't stop him, the answer is they gave that power away years ago. Story 106. The red, white, and yellow RCA cables, you know, the old ones for your VCR, the colors don't do anything special. You can put yellow and white together for audio and red for video. It would still work as long as it's color to color. Story 107. Noise-canceling headphones do nothing to filter out spoken words or sudden, loud noises. They only cancel repetitive sounds, like an engine humming or noisy machinery or tires on pavement. In fact, with a noise-canceling headphone that doesn't have a lot of insulating foam, you can easily understand a person speaking normally in a very loud engine room. Any insulation from loud, sudden noises or spoken words is purely from the insulating foam. Story 108. You will pay for your house twice, first for the capital repayments, and second for the interest accrued. Story 109. For most species of worm, you don't get two worms if you cut one in half. You get one worm that's been amputated. Story 110. That a moment was once a unit of time, specifically 90 seconds. So if you were alive in the Middle Ages and you said, "Give me a moment," you would be given about 90 seconds. Story 111. Shaving doesn't make your hair grow back thicker. Shaving has no effect on the follicle beneath your skin. Therefore, how on earth would your hair know it was shaven and to grow thicker? The only reason your hair seems to grow thicker when shaved is cause now you're more aware of it. Waxing actually damages the follicle and will then, in the long run, make your hair grow back thinner and less strong. Maybe even stop altogether, but definitely grow back slower. You're welcome. Story 112. If lefty loosey, righty tighty takes a few too many seconds for your brain to process, lockwise clockwise does the trick. For whatever reason, my brain computes clockwise much faster than which way is right when turning something, not because I confuse my left and right, but because turning a circle right eventually makes it go left, and that hurts my brain. Story 113. Astronauts in orbit don't float because they're in zero-G. They float because they're in constant free fall. Story 114. A lot of the time and resources at courthouses, town halls, and similar public office spaces is partied too hard on processing calls, letters, emails, and other incoming requests that will simply